Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Pep Rosenfeld from Boom Chicago here at the Nordic Business Forum, and it is a pleasure to be speaking this afternoon with Chris Voss. For 24 years, Chris worked in the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit, and from 2003 to 2007, he was the FBI's lead hostage negotiator and led a 90-person international negotiation response team. Yes, that is just as cool as it sounds. Since retiring from the FBI in 2007, Voss has taught negotiations at a number of esteemed institutions, including Harvard University and the IMD Business School in Lausanne. Currently, Chris is the CEO of the Black Swan Group, which solves business communication problems with hostage negotiation strategies for clients. He's also the author of the international seller, Never Split the Difference. Folks, it's a pleasure to be here with Chris Voss. Chris, how you doing?
Thanks, Pepe. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
That's great. And, I'm saying this afternoon because, of course, it's this afternoon for me, but it's not for you, and who knows when people are watching this. So just good day wherever and whenever you are.
Right.
Chris, I've got a bunch of questions for you. I'm gonna jump right in, and I guess what I want to do is talk about debunking some of the negotiation myths. I think a lot of us have this sort of idea of what a negotiation is supposed to be, but you would beg to differ on some of these gut feelings about negotiation. And I think the first one is right there in the title of your book, because I think a lot of people feel like splitting the difference is a great tactic. Both parties agree to meet halfway. I think a lot of people call that a success, but you suggest, and your book's title is very clear, that one should never split the difference. So I guess, why is that, and what in practice do you suggest as the alternative?
Yeah, we'll find a better answer. I mean, splitting the difference involves mutual loss, and both sides feel that they've lost. I've heard some people believe that a great negotiation when both sides are a little unhappy. Well, I don't like that idea. I don't think both sides should be unhappy. Any relationship, a marital relationship, long-term relationship of prosperity and trust, that would apply to a marital relationship. So why would you want a marital relationship where both sides were a little unhappy? That's not a recipe for long lasting. So what you got to do instead of splitting the difference is find out the right answer. I listened to a Jeff Bezos interview recently, and he said compromise is not about finding the truth. Well, take the time to find the best fit, and you're going to find you want to negotiate with people again instead of avoiding them.
So I guess I found, I've heard that about compromise, right? In a perfect compromise, no one is satisfied. But if you say, like, if you take out no one's happy and you just say nobody gets 100% what they wanted from the get-go, isn't that kind of splitting the difference?
Well, never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. What happens if instead of getting 100% of what you want, you actually ended up with an outcome that was far better than you ever imagined? If you're splitting the difference, that never happens. You're always unhappy. There's always some loss. There's always something you wish you would have gotten. Take the time to find out to get something better than what you imagined in the first place. And again, you want to repeat the negotiation.
So, and I'm just trying to kind of repeat what you're saying in my words to make sure I get it. But splitting the difference implies what my initial offer and their initial offer, those are the only two offers possible. And what you're saying is take the time to find out the thing you didn't even think of that's lurking out there, that when you talk about it enough, you will both end up happy.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always something better. It's never a negotiation where you're not holding information back. It just never happens. And why are you holding it back? Well, because it's important. If they knew, it would change everything. And so if that's always true for you, it's always true for the other side. So no matter what, you don't have any idea what the best outcome is because you're holding back things that are important and they're holding back things that are important. You start splitting the difference, you have no idea what you missed out on.
That is fascinating, and it makes a ton of sense. It's like calling the end of the poker hand before you actually see each other's cards.
Yeah, well said.
Alrighty. Here's another myth out there for you to bust. The myth is that the most aggressive negotiator wins. I think a lot of folks think that, if you go in there, you're more dominant, you're aggressive, and you tend to come out on top. Do you believe that this is true? And what practical strategies can negotiators use to counteract aggression without necessarily matching it? And then, I guess more importantly, how do you develop the skills to do that?
Well, short term, being aggressive is really satisfying. It feels really good in the moment. And what happens is people have a tendency to begin to avoid you. They just stop doing business with you entirely. One of the things that I liked about when I was teaching at Georgetown, I had my students write papers about their negotiations with each other when I signed them to each other. And every now and then I get papers from two sides. And that happened once, and one of the people that wrote up the paper said, it was a great negotiation. I got everything I wanted, and I would love to negotiate with this person again. Now, the other person wrote, I will never, ever deal with them again. And that's what happens when you're aggressive. A classic example in the United States, Donald Trump, love him or hate him, owned a project called the West Side Railroad Yards for years. Trump Tower was a spectacular success. Grand Central Station, a spectacular success. The Woolman Skating Rink, a spectacular success. So he held on to this property development called the West Side Railroad Yards for well over 20 years, and nothing happened, which is now one of the largest developments in real estate, and the Chelsea Pier is one of the most successful developments in New York City history, in Manhattan history. Why did it take so long? People got so tired of dealing with Donald Trump in New York that no one would collaborate with him. No contractors would work with him. He couldn't get the zoning he wanted. He couldn't get the community groups. And that project remained a large vacant lot for nearly 20 years before it finally got out. And now it's one of the most spectacular developments in New York City because no one would deal with him, and he finally sold his interests. That's what happens when you're an aggressive negotiator.
Well, so that makes sense, but it sounds like in the short term, it can kind of work, right? I mean, you piss people off in the long term, but if you're just looking for that short term gain, is an aggressive posture a good one? Or
Well, there was a Goldman Sachs executive a long time ago said, greedy, yes, but long-term greedy. When you're short-term greedy, you're destined for bankruptcy. You're destined to have to leave the city and move on. You're destined to have to go someplace else because pretty soon no one will deal with you. On a much smaller scale, a number of years ago, I was coaching a CEO of a company, and he said, I got a deal on my desk right now. And the CEO on the other side has agreed to every single part of this agreement, and he won't sign it. Why not? Because I've got such a reputation as being an aggressive negotiator and always getting my way. He feels as soon as he signs his deal that he was part of every step of the way, he's going to get fired. And fewer people will deal with me. And so, yeah, you want to be in business for 1, 2, 3, 4 years max. Then pretty soon deals start drying up. And then it's been how many years since you made a great deal? Because nobody will talk to you.
Well, then let me go back to the other part of the question, which is, what do you do when you're facing someone who is taking an aggressive stance? What's a good way to deal with that, and how do you develop that skill?
Well, first of all, those people are very costly. There's a friend of mine called Joe Polish, and I learned a great concept from him. He runs an outfit called Genius Network. I happen to have his T-shirt on today. He says there's two kinds of counterparts. There's elves and halves. Elf is easy, lucrative, and fun. Half is hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. Now, if you work for me, you figure I work for Chris Voss Negotiation. We got to make every deal with every customer that comes in the door. And I told my people, no, you don't. We don't want to deal with hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating people. I think they're costly. So before my sales team, my business development team started to disregard them, they said, well, let's look for the profile. Let's see if these people will show themselves in the first half hour, and they will. Now, let's keep track of how long it takes to make a deal with them. So after about 6 months, my team gets back to me, and he said, all right, so here's what the hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, aggressive people look like. It takes us anywhere from 2 to 5 times as long from the moment we start talking to them to the moment we get paid. 2 to 5 times. What does that mean? If it's only twice as long, we just took a 50% cut in pay. Secondly, they're so annoying and frustrating and aggravating. We never do business with them again, so they don't repeat. So what happens with an aggressive negotiator? You took a 50% cut in pay and you'll never do business with them again. That's not a recipe for staying in business.
No, it sounds like it's not. All right, I've got another myth for you, Chris. I've got another myth for you, and that is that negotiation is all about persuasion. We know that persuasion is a part of negotiation, but you've called for strategic empathy as well. Can you elaborate a bit more on that and tell us what exercises can help improve a negotiator's skill in strategic empathy?
Yeah, well, it's tactical empathy, by the way, and it's long-lasting influence, which is the issue. And it's a little bit like the yes momentum or persuasion is similar to that. Like if I talk you into something, if I persuade you, you're actually high maintenance. I got to talk to you all the time because overnight, 2 or 3 days later, you're having second thoughts. My influence is wearing off because I persuaded you, and your fears are starting to set into place. You end up being a high maintenance customer for me. I got to talk to you all the time. But if I have lasting influence based on empathy, tactical empathy, which is just the use of emotional intelligence guided by neuroscience, well, it tends to last. You tend to be a low maintenance person. My influence, my relationship with you lasts just like we're good friends. I've got rapport and I don't got to talk to you every day. And also, if in a deal, when something starts to go wrong, every deal has problems, has glitches, unforeseen circumstances.
Of course.
If we got a great relationship where I've got influence with you, I've got rapport, you'll call me up and say, hey, I got bad news. We got some problems we got to fix. On the other hand, if I persuaded you, you're ultimately going to feel like I talked you into this. And then when there are problems, you're not going to call me because I talked you into it. And you're worried about calling me. I'm going to talk you into something else. And you're not going to have what you wanted and you're not going to fix the problem. And you're going to start to avoid me. So it's really understanding the difference between influence and persuasion.
The worst part of hearing that answer was realizing, I know who persuaded me into things and I know exactly how I respond to them, and it sounds painfully familiar to hear. But so you said a mix of emotional intelligence and neuroscience is
Right.
the way to get that tactical influence. Can you be a bit more? Can you give us some more detail there?
Well, yeah, emotional intelligence it's really just guided by neuroscience, and it's information that we've really learned. Maybe we, collective we human beings, in about the last 10 years. So, what do I mean by that? Like self-effacing humor. Like, you're probably going to think I'm some sort of an idiot here, and I say that in a playful manner. Well, first of all, by saying it playfully, I've impacted your neurochemicals. Emotions are contagious for a hard neuroscience reason. Neurochemicals create a change in how you feel. You're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. So if I'm playful with you, we're both smarter together.
Hmm.
And then what I've done with self-effacing humor is essentially deactivating negative thoughts in your head by calling them out instead of denying them. There's a 2 millimeter shift, and the neuroscience is pretty clear. You get rid of a negative by calling it out, not by denying it. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean I don't want you to think I'm getting ready to be greedy. That's a denial. I don't want you to think. I don't want you to think I'm asking for too much. I don't want you to think that I'm being disrespectful. The 2 millimeter shift to call it out, which actually works, is you're probably going to think I'm greedy. You're probably going to think I'm being disrespectful. That little change from the denial to simply calling it out changes me from being someone who's trying to hoodwink you to somebody you see as a straight shooter. A straight shooter is somebody who tells the truth in an emotional intelligence way. And neuroscience has backed up what people with real emotional intelligence have learned over the course of an experience of life that they actually pay attention to.
That makes perfect sense to hear you say it. It's funny. I also feel like if somebody says to me, you're probably going to think this sounds greedy, my instinct is to go, oh, I'll tell you what sounds greedy. You say it now, and I guarantee it won't sound greedy. I don't want you to tell me what to think.
Right.
Okay, here's another myth. Standard tactics work in every situation. Are there standard strategies and tactics applicable for all negotiations, or are they all highly situational? And how much should business leaders learn how to adapt and how they can learn to adjust?
Well, it's a little like tailoring. We use the same 9 negotiation skills in a Black Swan method, regardless of the circumstances. Now, we tailor them to the person and the situation. The same way a tailor uses the same tools, a needle and thread, scissors, a measuring tape, with someone who's tall and thin or someone who's short and round. You adapt to the situation, but using the same skills adapted to that person. And the adaptation really is all people want you to know that you understood them. I am in a conference of business negotiation practitioners and experts in Germany, probably about 10 months ago. There's a gentleman there who's a self-proclaimed cross-cultural negotiation expert. I know how to deal with Germans. I know how to deal with Italians. I know how to deal with the French and the English. And we're having a conversation, and he can tell from the look on my face that I'm just not buying it, that you have to know all these cultures. And finally, he just blurts out to me, look, everybody just wants to know that you know where they're coming from. And I said, exactly. That's empathy.
That's fantastic, and I'll bet it's true in more cases than negotiation cases as well.
Exactly. Just all human communication, because we're all human beings, regardless of the geography we grew up in.
Yeah. I get the same question a lot about humor. Oh, is it so different to make jokes for Dutch people where I live now or for Americans where I came from? And I'm always like, reference level has to be different, but people find funny things funny wherever they are. And it's interesting to hear you say something so similar about negotiation.
Yeah.
I've heard tell that good negotiators are born and not made. And I wonder what you'd say about that. What can anyone become a master negotiator? And if so, what key skills should be developed in order to become an effective negotiator?
Yeah, I think pretty much everything is learned. There's a book that I'm a big fan of called The Talent Code, which pretty much says I can't think of the gentleman's name. He wrote 2 books that I really like, The Talent Code and The Culture Code. But his contention is everything is learned, that we're all a blank slate when we're born. And with the exception of, you can't be Shaquille O'Neal. If you want to be an NBA center, you're going to need some God-given size. But there are plenty of 7-footers that never made the NBA. So whatever your sport is, it was learned. It was practiced. You picked it up. You somewhere along the line, you found the delight in it, and you enjoyed it, and then you put in the time. So I think negotiation is very much along those lines. If you want to learn it and you're coachable and or hardworking, you'll get it. Ideally, you're both. I like to think of myself as being very coachable and very hardworking, not particularly smart. I am very coachable, and I work very hard. And if you got either or both of those characteristics, you can get really good at negotiation.
And what about specific skills that people could focus on? What do you think people could be working on when they work on themselves if they want to become a better negotiator?
Well, actually listening as opposed to waiting for your turn to speak. Thinking about what somebody said, feeding it back to them, thinking with them, making sure that what you heard is what they wanted you to hear. And then sort of the magic is really in tone of voice, tonality. There's some alchemy. There's some magic in how you use tone of voice. And if you just practice it, and there are great examples everywhere. One of the reasons why I listen to comedians on a regular basis is There are certain comedians that if they didn't change their tone of voice, it wouldn't be that funny. Chris Rock, Lewis Black, any of these guys, if you read what their jokes in a monotone, then you wouldn't laugh at all. But if you listen to the delivery and then you start paying attention to delivery, and you can really make a big difference in how you communicate.
I don't know if you're a fan of Stephen Covey, but I remember his fifth habit was seek first to understand before you try to be understood. And that seems like it's pretty key to what you're saying. Listen, make sure you understand what the other person's saying, what they're coming from, what they want before you try and deal with it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm out of myths, but I can't help but want to know, is there a myth that you sort of wish I'd asked you about? Like, is there something that a lot of us out there think is true of negotiating, and but it's 100% not true?
Well, I think really, if going first is a mistake, everybody comes to the table. We have this intense desire to go first because we want to be heard. You want to be heard, and realizing that your feeling in an interaction, in some ways, is similar to theirs. They want to be heard, and whatever word it is, yes, no, maybe, I'll think about it. How it impacts you to hear it and how it impacts you to say it is very different. So you really start with, all right, so the other side wants to be heard as badly as I do. What happens if I let them go first? Let them go first. You're going to gather a lot of information, and they're going to feel really good about it, and you'll probably be smarter in the moment.
Now, I've heard said, you want to go first because then you sort of plant the first flag of the negotiation, and you've sort of set the baseline for what we're now debating. Is there any truth to that?
That I don't like that at all, and here's why I don't like that. You have to assume that you've got perfect information on what the spectrum is, what the zone of possible agreement is, as my Harvard brethren like to call it, the ZOPA, zone of possible agreement. I had a student in my class once at Georgetown was negotiating for a job, and he was on his way. He was making $85,000 at the time, and he wanted to, in the new job, he wanted to make $110,000. So on his way to the interview, he's talking to it about his dad, and he's talking about this big raise, a big increase in his salary with the new employer he's going to ask for. And his dad's like, I don't know, it's a big jump from where you are now. And he was really determined. I'm gonna ask for this. So he gets in there and he asks for the 110, and they kind of hesitate and they kind of wait. And at the end of the negotiations, they say, okay, all right, you got it. You're so adamant you want 110, you're going to get it. So he's there about 3-4 months, and he's talking to one of his colleagues hired into a similar job at about the same time. And his colleague says, what do you think of the job? What do you think of our compensation? And he says, well, I negotiated my own rate. And the other guy said, really? You're making more than $125,000?
I had a feeling I knew how that story was going to end.
Yeah,
that would be
like
painful.
you got to be careful. You think you're coming in high and you're low. I mean, I don't want that to happen to me.
Yeah. And if someone, I don't want that to happen to me either. Well, thanks for helping me debunk some of these negotiating myths.